Two. And we are live here on the February 8th edition of the MMA Industry podcast. I am, of course, James Lynch, and I've got a special guest today all the way from Egypt. She's joining me here. First female guest on the program. I am joined today by Farah Hannoun. She, of course, is doing some great work over at the Sports Journal, and she covers, of course, mixed martial arts because that's why she's here. Farah, how are you today?
I'm doing good, James. Thank you so much for having me on a show. It's a pleasure. It's honestly an honor, and I've seen all the previous episodes and all your work, so it's an honor to be here.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. And I should say thank you for joining me here this evening because it's actually about 8 o'clock your time in Egypt. You know, we talked a bit about this off air. You know, how difficult is that trying to coordinate interviews when you're in a different time zone?
Really difficult, to be honest. But of course, I have to cater for the fighters. They're kind of training three, 4 times a day. And I understand a lot of times they'll be driving somewhere or driving back from another place. And so obviously I have to cater for their time. For me to make it work, it's probably past midnight is when I start my interviews. That way I'm kind of comfortable and I know that they'll be available for it as well. Midnight, and I kind of put probably a midnight to a 3 a.m. time slot just so I don't end up staying a bit too late, which is not even that much of a problem for me. The problem is I've had a couple of occasions where an interview would be scheduled like 5 a.m. and I'd be up until then, and then a fighter just forgets. And of course, I can't show my frustration, so I'll be like, sure, no problem. And they probably don't even know it's 5 a.m. in my time, and it gets a little tough and frustrating. So I kind of put time frame from whatever o'clock to maybe 3, 4 a.m. tops. That way, if it doesn't work, then we could reschedule for the next day or whatever. So I guess that's the way I do it.
Yeah, you're a trooper. I mean, that time is just like completely out of my realm. Like I would like the opposite. You know, I'm a morning person. If I could do interviews at like 6 in the morning, that would be perfect. But yeah, no, that's interesting. So, you know, usually off the top, I say how sort of I know my guest, and you and I have never met, and I don't know that much about you. I mean, I'm familiar with your work, and obviously you do some great stuff, you know, with the breaking news and the interviews. It's like every time I check my Twitter feed, you're doing another big name interview. But you know, I got to ask, you know, do you ever make your way out to North America at all, as far as, you know, whether it's going to events or even just coming out in general?
I haven't yet. I'd love to, and I'd love to make a massive trip out of it because it's pretty far, halfway across the world. But I'd love sometime to just go for at least a couple of months, do East Coast, West Coast, just get a lot of work done. I haven't gotten the opportunity yet, but I'd absolutely love to, and it's definitely my plan in the future. But
so Europe what is the plane ride from Egypt to sorry, where you're based in Egypt to Las Vegas? Is that like what's the plane time for that?
I'd say you'd probably have to do Cairo, Frankfurt, and then Frankfurt, LA, and then LA, Vegas, I guess it would have to be. Wow. So with the layovers and all that, probably. I don't mind the long flight, but it's just if I'm gonna go all the way there, I'd want like a nice couple of months. I might as well like fly all the way there, do East Coast, a bit of West Coast, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and get lots of content too. I know that's one of the reasons I love doing International Fight Week every year, is because you get the 2 events. So the amount of content you're going to get is just awesome. But we can talk about that a little bit later. First, you know, again, first time I've had you on the show, and first time we've sort of talked. Where did that interest begin, as far as you know, falling in love with combat sports and covering this you know, this crazy sport we have?
MMA in general, as a fan, I'd say probably back in like 2008, 2009. It was my brother and my cousins. I grew up with guys pretty much my whole life. So whatever they were into, if I wasn't into, I'd be left out. So I'd spend my summers with the guys. So they were watching. It started with pro wrestling and then eventually into MMA. And they'd be watching it, so I'd watch it with them. And it was a time, like I'd say, George St. Pierre, Lyoto Machida, Anderson Silva, those guys, and then Matt Serra, Matt Hughes, and you got all those guys. And I was watching it, but I wasn't like an avid fan, so I'd watch it in and out and not live, because obviously the timing, it's probably from 1 to 8 a.m. is when the fights air, and you'd have to be a pretty diehard fan to do that. And I used to do that with the NBA, but at that time I wasn't that big of an MMA fan, so I'd have to watch the repeat and all that. But I'd probably say the first fight that I really got into the whole thing, like the press conference, the promo and all that, was Son and Silva 1. And that's just because my cousin was showing me all that promo stuff, and obviously Chael was doing his thing, and it kind of reminded me of pro wrestling because that's what I used to watch when I was a kid. And he was showing me how MMA could also be like that. And then you had Anderson, who's this legend, and Chael, who's like trash talking and all that. And he showed me all the press conferences, and it wasn't Countdown, it was like Prime Time or whatever at the time. And yeah, it really gets you into a fight, whether you like combat sports or not, like that kind of thing. It really gets you into it. And I guess that's how they call the casual fans. Like they get them into it by showing them this kind of stuff. So that's when I was really hooked on to like the result of a fight, like being so intrigued about what happened. So obviously I watched it live. Like we stayed up until like 8 a.m. We all gathered together. And obviously the way the fight even panned out was insane. So
Yeah, it certainly was. What a nice introduction. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was like the first time where I was actually like an avid fan. The others would be like I'd watch random fights, like UFC 77 and all that. That would be just like random. But that was the first time I watched it as like an avid fan.
Very cool. Now I keep seeing that you're from Egypt. That's, you know, ignorant of me, I should say, because that's like saying, hey, he's from Canada, and Canada's huge. So it's one of those things. Where exactly are you from? For those who don't know, and you know, what was sort of it like growing up there?
Okay, so I was born and raised in Egypt. My father is Palestinian, my mom's Moroccan, but I was born and raised in Egypt. Pretty regular upbringing, I'd say. Like played a lot of sports growing up. Played football or soccer, as some people call it. Did taekwondo a bit as a kid, gymnastics, ballet, like you name it. You know, a typical kid that tries all the sports. And then I'd probably say that around the age of like 13, 14, I got really into basketball. Like I wanted to be a pro basketball player, and that's all I kind of did. Just spend 85% of my time on the basketball court and probably 15% doing homework. And like it just kind of went on from there. And funny enough, like when I wanted to start writing, because I said to myself, I'm like, when it reached a point where I felt like I wasn't going to become a pro athlete, I said to myself, if I can't write my own story, I wanted to write somebody else's. And that's kind of how I got into writing and trying to be a journalist and interviewing people. And honestly, the goal in the beginning was to do it with basketball, not MMA.
Okay.
Yeah. So what it was, the idea, I started out with Instagram. So I wasn't even on Twitter. I started with an Instagram page. It's called UFC News Alerts. And
yeah, I've seen that. It's huge. It's a huge account.
Thank you. What I did was like, I just like stay up, watch the fights, update people with results, any fight announcements. I didn't have any scoops or any of that back then. It was just, I was very informative and not just like be on top of everything. And it started out with that. And I got that idea actually from a football page that I used to follow. It was in Arabic. And they used to do that basically. So they'd put all the results. So let's say it's like the Premier League today, like whatever, Arsenal win, Man U win, Chelsea win, and they'd put all the results. And I liked that concept because it was very useful for me as a football or a soccer fan to have an outlet like that. Because nobody, like a lot of people don't like to read. Like you put a lot of words that they're just not going to read it, especially if you're not somebody that's established in the industry. And obviously at the time I wasn't. So I got the idea from football. And I wanted to do it basketball, but then there was something about MMA that was just so intriguing. Like it's such a fast-growing sport. Being a girl in the Middle East, it's just so rare and different. And I'm like, why not? It's like, it's challenging and it's different. Like basketball, I'm sure there are plenty of pages out there on Instagram and plenty of journalists and stuff that cover it. So I said, let's go for something different. So I started with MMA, and obviously I had no idea what I was doing. I just like post random pictures, and I didn't even get the concept of crediting. Like there are photographers out there, there are journalists who break the news there. I didn't get any of that. Like I was just like slapping pictures right and left. And yeah, like I got quite a big following from it, and it started to grow and grow and grow. And I kind of used that to branch out into my journalism career, basically.
Very cool. That's interesting. You said a lot of interesting things there. One of the things I wanted to know: did you go to like post-secondary for writing or anything like that? Did you do any schooling or anything?
No. In high school, I'd say that pretty much the only good things I was at was sports or writing. That's it. Like nice. I hated everything else. I actually used to write a lot of poems in school, and that was funny to people because they're used to me like being on a basketball court or being like playing sports. Like they found it really odd that I used to write and poems, and they were so deep and stuff. And so yeah, like I remember I won like a whole school poetry competition. My parents were so freaking proud. Like they never, like the sports stuff was cool, but for them to see that side of me, they were so proud of that. And that's when I kind of like got an interest in writing, but I wasn't really like poetry wasn't really my thing. So basically when I went to university, I graduated with a degree in communication and media arts. I went to university in Egypt. I went to the American University in Cairo. I graduated with a degree in communication media arts. But the problem with that was I did a bit of everything, but very basic. So
Yeah.
very intro classes to everything. There wasn't nothing concentrated, which was a shame. The only class that I really wanted to continue was kind of like TV and broadcast, but it clashed with the rest of my classes and I had to drop it. So I never really got the experience I wanted to out of like camera and editing and writing. So I only took basically intro classes, but that's when the interest started to grow more and more.
See, that's interesting. You and I have a very sort of similar backstory then, because I initially wanted to be a hockey reporter, you know, typical, stereotypical Canadian right here, you know, wanting to cover hockey. And then I got into MMA. And then same thing with me. I actually graduated with a communications degree as well. But I remember like partway through my program, I'm like, this is way too much like theoretical stuff. I need to get the hands on. And so I actually went a step further and went to college and did like a 2-year television broadcasting program where I learned how to edit. I learned how to be on camera and all those things. So I was lucky in that sense to sort of learn that. But it's funny to see the differences between post-secondary education, because I know for some people it works. You know, a lot of people that I graduated with in university, a lot of them work for the government. I mean, nobody's even close to doing anything to sports. So I find that kind of interesting. Do you remember the first sort of like, whether it was a written piece or anything like that you first did sort of early on, that you sort of put, pen to paper, and was it for like an outlet or was it just your own site?
It was kind of like a blog, and it was, what I would do is like I'd watch an event and I'd do like a play-by-play, but way too much of a play-by-play. And I'd end up writing so much and I'd get the biggest headache because the event would finish and I'm up until like 10 a.m. I'm like, nobody's going to read this, right? Like, I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but like, I didn't even, because there's a certain way to write when you do a play-by-play. Like, no, it's like, I'm not going to be like, he hit him with a right jab and did this or that. Like, it was way too informative. And I feel like that kind of writing helped me understand that like too much isn't necessarily better. And that style of writing isn't even what I want to do. But I did start out with that, where I break down an event and just completely break down every little thing that happened in the fight and every single fight on the card. And there are people who do that, but there's a certain style of writing you got to do for that without boring people and boring yourself in the process.
Yeah.
So yeah,
sure.
I'd probably say that was,
who's sorry, go ahead. What were you saying, sorry?
No, I was saying that was like the first writing I ever did. Yeah.
Gotcha. Now, as far as, mentors, whether it was people, that you were reading their work, who's sort of some of the early people that you were sort of checking out and trying to, maybe not emulate, but just sort of learn from?
I wouldn't say there's anyone specific in terms of a journalist or anything like that, but I'd say like something that helped me a lot growing up, that even improved my English, because I wasn't a kid that read a lot like of literature and stuff like that. I'd only read when I have to for class. But actually commentary, when I listen to the NBA, when I watch the games and stuff, I used to pay a lot of attention to commentary, and I'd learn a lot of words from the way they describe things. So actually that helped me a lot, watching, whether it be basketball or football or whatever. Even pro wrestling, that's funny enough. I learned so much about America in general from pro wrestling, like just the different cities and states, like Brock Lesnar would come in from Minneapolis, Minnesota, that guy's here. And it's like, because obviously like we don't get educated about that. And even here, like in Egypt, I only learned American history in university. In high school, I went to a British school. So we would learn about like French and British and a lot of other history, but it's not American history. So it's like I learned about all these different states and cities and stuff like that just through like television, really, just like watching sports and all that. So I feel like that my vocabulary got a lot better from watching this stuff as more than it is reading.
Okay. What about like websites? Like when you first started sort of covering the sport, were you, going to MMA Junkie? Were you going to some of the American sites, or were you going to other websites as far as, getting your news and getting information?
Yeah, probably like, I don't remember it specifically, but it must be like MMA Fighting, MMA Junkie, MMA Weekly, Bloody Elbow, all those. Yep.
Perfect. See, I was a Sherdog guy back in the day. That's what I used to read. And then, of course, Junkie. I remember reading MMA Junkie when it used to be UFC Junkie. That's how long ago it was. They ended up switching it over. So, I'm not like a total old G, but I definitely remember seeing the early days of that. What about the first fighter you ever interviewed? And, were you nervous at all doing that, doing it for the first time?
First, because I actually, for the longest time, used to do interviews through email, just questions, not call. I definitely didn't have the confidence for a call for a long time. So the first fighter in terms of like through email was Patrick Cote, Canadian.
Oh, cool. Okay, nice.
Yeah. That was really cool for me at the time because I actually remember messaging him. He followed me on Twitter. I guess because I used to post a lot of updates, so some fighters actually used to like that. They used to like follow me for that purpose. And one time I decided to DM him and ask, and he said yes. So I remember I was on the basketball court, and because it was the outdoor court, and my hands are all dirty, and I hear my phone buzzing, and it's like it says Patrick O'Tain on the screen. I'm like, no way! And I pick up the phone, and he's agreeing to do an interview. So I remember that. That was my first like written one. Our first call was Mickey Gall, actually. And I was super nervous. And funny enough, because at the time, Mickey Gall hadn't fought anybody yet. He was just signed to, like, after, what's the show, Looking for a Fighter. He had just signed. So he was so confident. I'm like, this kid hasn't even fought in the UFC yet. And he's so confident. I felt like, in a way, he was trying to comfort me in the call because I sounded so nervous. And I laugh about it now because I'm like, I was supposed to be the journalist, the reporter, and he's just signed to the UFC. He's somehow like kind of comforting me in this call. So that was funny. So he was my first call interview, actually, and I was super nervous.
Interesting. What about your first media gig as far as like an outlet? What was the first one you started working for?
I actually never worked for any outlet. Like right now, I write for a sports journal. Basically, the site just started. I met the guy at a show in Brave Combat Federation in Abu Dhabi. I was there writing a piece for an outlet. I don't work for them, but I was writing one piece. I interviewed Chris Cyborg, and I was doing it for them. And I met him there. And then after that, I found out that he was opening a new site. It's a sports site. So I said, why not start writing? Because I really do want to stay in touch with the Middle East and the MMA scene there as well. That's important to me as I grow individually. So I thought it would be a good idea, but I actually don't write or work for any outlets. So I do pretty much a lot just on my own.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know you do a lot of stuff on SoundCloud. That's actually where I hear a lot of your interviews. You'll post an interview right away or whatever. When did you start doing that? Because I mean, I've seen it the last little bit, but it seems like you're doing so much more now than before.
Very recently. And it's still not like I still gotta like tighten up on the professionalism, so to speak. But yeah, very recently, I thought it was a good and fast way because what would happen most of the time is that when I'd be done with an interview, it's already like 5 a.m. And if I start writing, I'm not going to sleep. So I'd go to bed and then I'd get up and then I'd have to do it. And sometimes like if you interview a fighter and they give you a couple of interesting pieces of information, you want to put it out there. You don't want to sit on it. It's the MMA world. A fight could get canceled in 12 hours, you know, like you could be talking to somebody about a fight and it can get canceled. So, the SoundCloud thing is good because I don't have an editing background and I'm trying to learn and play around with it quite a bit. But SoundCloud's good because you don't need to do any crazy editing because it's just audio. So I found it a good way to kind of put it out there quickly, but that's definitely not the way I'm going to go down the line. I'm still learning. Eventually I want to get it on YouTube and kind of sharpen up on my editing, but that's taking it step by step.
Great. Well, hit me up after the show. I can give some advice because I've done a fair bit of editing in my time. And it's actually it's once you sort of get the hang of it, it's pretty seamless. That's why people ask why I do so many interviews. It's because I can edit really fast because of, just the experience I've had and whatever. But yeah, that's interesting. Was there anyone that sort of you mentioned watching NBA and things like that? As far as the style you have of when you're speaking on air, because I'll be honest, when I listen to it, I really enjoy it because it comes across more as like a conversation than an interview. And I think that's what people want. They want the fighters to be at ease. They want to, get them, get the most honest answers out of them. Would you say sort of watching the NBA broadcast is sort of where you got your style, or did that come from somewhere else?
I'm not sure where it came from, honestly. But it probably, it sound a little silly, but I've always been like amused by like interviewing and all that stuff. So when I was a kid, I used to have this microphone. I don't even know why we had a microphone because nobody in the family can sing. But we used to have this microphone and I ripped off the cord, so I ruined it. And I used to run around and I'd like, kind of with my brother, I'd like fake interview him all the time. So it was always something I used to like do. But I'd be annoying with him about it. Like I'd act like he had the worst game of his life, like shooting wise or something. But like I'd go in with that approach. And of course, that's probably something that I used to watch on TV or I'd emulate. I don't particularly remember who I'd be emulating, but like I'm pretty sure by watching a lot of that, it's just something that I'd paid a lot of attention to, stats and commentary and that, not just the game or the fight or the match itself. So I probably do emulate somebody. I just don't know who, but I probably like got a bit of everything from everyone.
Very cool. I think most people watching this will probably remember you even before your interviews when you started really breaking news. And I remember there's been a couple occasions where I've seen, MMA fighting like source you, and that's a huge deal. I mean, as far as breaking news goes, that's sort of the pinnacle, is getting a mention from a huge site like that. When did that sort of start? Was that sort of the? I mean, I imagine that was sort of the first thing you started doing, was the breaking news, or was it the writing? What sort of came first?
Actually, the writing and the interviewing came a lot before the breaking news. Breaking news, I wasn't intending on doing it. It kind of just happened naturally. Just more connections in the sport and in the industry, really. And it started out, I can't even remember what the first one I broke was, but you kind of get a bit addicted to it in a way. But I started getting a bit too focused on that, and I got away from the interviewing, and I wanted to go back to that. So it's kind of like, it's something that just comes. Like sometimes they'll come right one after the other, and then there'll be a long period of time of nothing. But it's not something that I necessarily seek too much, more than it happens naturally. Sometimes I don't expect it, and then it's like I have to go confirm a couple of sources because you get afraid like that it's not true or whatnot. So it kind of happens naturally. To be honest, it's not something that I pick up my phone and try to go crazy trying to find something out. But that's in terms of breaking news. But in terms of pinpointing certain things, I do try to keep an eye on social media and all that as much as possible. That helps with not necessarily breaking news, but pointing out something that somebody didn't see. More like
Yeah,
that.
and it's a really tough it's a really tough gig. I had Nolan King on last week, who I think's another another person in this industry who's doing such a great job with that. The both of you, I should actually say, I think that's a part of the reason why I wanted to get you on this week. I think both of you are sort of the future of this, working in this industry. So I'm happy to have you both
Thank
on.
you.
But the breaking news, I mean, it's a tough gig, because if you're wrong, people hate you forever. If you're right, though, I mean, obviously, the credit is well deserved. How did you go about getting sources? Was it just through your interviews, or how did you sort of, you mentioned the social media, keeping an eye on that, but I guess you just sort of developed sources as you were doing the interviews?
Yeah, it's pretty much that. And then my social media helps me get the interviews, which helps me build the source. So it kind of goes, it all starts for me from my Instagram, to be honest. Like that's where everything started. But the problem with that is I'm not under my name on Instagram. So I'm pretty sure half these people I communicate with me probably think I'm a dude, which happens to me all the time. Funny enough, I interviewed Alan Joban, somebody you spoke to recently, and he was so baffled. He's like, I thought you were a dude from California. And I was just laughing because like he had no idea. And that's how half the people I communicate with, they just don't know that I'm a girl. Even though I'll say my name and I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's not a name that's popular in America, or maybe they didn't even pay attention to the name. But I get that a lot. Like a lot of people think I'm a guy that lives in the US. And I just don't find it relevant to jump and be like, by the way, I'm a girl, like unless there's like further communication and all that. But it all started with Instagram. Like I have pretty solid follows on Instagram that kind of help me.
No, that certainly helps too. I guess, having that big fan base or whatever, well, the following, I should say, and having a lot of resources there. It kind of brings me to my next point. You kind of touched on something there. People surprised that you're a female working in this space, because there aren't a lot of women who are covering mixed martial arts. Especially not full time. Why do you think that is? Do you think there's just not an interest there, or do you see it as just that you really have to be dedicated to this, and it's just MMA is not a what's the word to put it? It's one of those things you really have to love it, because the payoff's not incredibly great in the end, especially financially.
100%. It's I'm pretty sure nobody goes into this like with the intention of making like so much money or whatever. It's a passion thing, 100%. And for me personally, like I said, it helped that I grew up with guys, so it definitely helped. But yeah, you have to have 100% like passion for it. And in terms of girls, I guess, I don't know. It depends like how they get into MMA. So there are some girls that I see on Twitter that are like upcoming journalists and stuff like that. And that's really cool. I get happy to see that, to see a lot more girls covering the sport. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what it is, honestly.
Well, I see some people, I've seen this question posed, a bunch of times, why aren't there more women covering MMA? And I see a lot of people suggest that it's because outlets aren't giving them opportunities. What do you think about that? Or do you think, like we just said there, that it's just an interest thing?
I don't know. I mean, because I feel like I haven't gotten the opportunity that I want yet, but I can't 100% say it's because of this or that. Then, like, I don't know what it is. Like, I guess I'd have to ask the outlets themselves. But maybe if certain girls feel that way, I don't know. But I do notice, like, maybe if you look at MMA Junkie and MMA Fighting, they don't have a lot of girls covering the sport. Only recently did they have a couple actually MMA Junkie and stuff. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it's something you could ask them next time.
No, I definitely will. There's so many women I want to get on this show that do. Then that's the thing. Like, there's so many I do see that are covering the sport. You know, you got Amy Kaplan and Nicole Bosco at Fansided. You've got Jade Morris at Yahoo Sports. You know, it's just there are women covering the sport, but they're just not on those bigger sites that you see. Like you know, Fernanda, who does a great job at MMA Junkie. She's sort of one of the ones that sticks out because she works, you know, for Junkie and obviously does some great work as well. So I think there are people out there. It's just a matter of getting those opportunities. Because I even remember back when I first started, you know, getting into the sport, Loretta Hunt was sort of the big one as far as you know, a female covering MMA. And I know there hasn't been too many after her, but I think things are starting to change a little bit, and hopefully, you know, we see more in this space. Because I think the most important thing is you know, having good representation, and also just having you know, a different opinion, maybe on certain things and a different perspective. Because you know, I think it's any different opinion is good for the sport. So. That's my 2 cents on that. On the kind of on that same note, has there been any challenges, you know, being a woman? Do you ever get any, you know, fighters disrespectful, or any sort of people who maybe don't give you the respect you deserve?
I wouldn't say fighters. Fighters have been great, to be honest. Like, the MMA fighters are some of the nicest people. Like, it's they're great. Probably people or fans of the sport for sure. They could be, but they're kind of like that with everything. You can't stop them, you can't control them, you just have to block them. And sometimes, like, because I like to do like kind of live videos on my Instagram feed, and I'll get the occasional 5-10 people who are being a little stupid, but if you comment on it, you're giving them what they want, so you just brush it off.
Yeah. See, I talked to Sean Ross Sapp about this. He was the first guest here on the show. He's the managing editor here at Fightful. And, you know, just about social media, how you sort of handle yourself. Because, I mean, I get people telling me I suck all the time, but I can only imagine it would be, you know, a million times worse being a woman, just because you're going to get the sexual references and all that, you know, garbage and things like that. And it's much easier to do on social media because, you know, these people are behind an anonymous profile. I like doing the mute thing because I think with mute, if you mute someone on Twitter, they don't know that you've muted them. So you can just ignore them. And if you block them, it shows that you get under their skin. I'll only block someone if they're really like tagging my outlets and starting to be really ridiculous. But I think mute is the way to go as far as dealing with people. But don't even reason with them. That's sort of my philosophy on trolls. Is that sort of your way as well?
Yeah. Like, actually, because some people would jump and defend as well, which is pretty cool. Like, if I'm doing one of these live videos, somebody will be stupid and then somebody defends. I'm like, all right, they're doing what I in my head want to say, but I'm not gonna say, so it's like perfect. So there are, you know, I guess it gets like, the more and more I try to establish myself, I guess the more respect I'll get as a female. But regardless, no matter what, you're still gonna get a few people doing it, because I see it with other journalists, and they comment on it, and it's like, I never want to, but sometimes I can't relate to them in their specific circumstances. Like, maybe sometimes they just can't take it anymore because this person's been bothering them for weeks or whatever. So yeah.
And on that same note, who would you say you sort of associate with a lot as far as you know, people in this industry? You know, I know there's so many people on Twitter, I'm sure you talk to all the time, or, you know, other social media platforms. But is there people you sort of talk to on a regular basis, whether it's you know, throwing advice their way or maybe getting some feedback?
I don't know. Like, I don't have somebody specific. I do I'll say this: like, people on Twitter are awesome. Like, the people that I've communicated with, like Nolan, you had on your show. There's Marcel, he's over at the Netherlands. Yourself, so many people, everybody's been so great and supportive, and that's super surprising for me. Not that I expected the opposite, but I just like to see, I'm talking to people that are all around the world doing their thing, and we're all talking about this one thing in common, being MMA, but everybody's been so supportive and just really nice and offering advice. And even when they want to say something, like, I remember I had this tendency when I first started out, like, I didn't really understand the way the whole crediting thing worked, because I wasn't planning on being a reporter. Like, that wasn't even my plan. Like, I was just putting out there, and then somebody would message me and be like, by the way, it was this person that broke the news. And be like, oh, all right, like, this was new to me. But it's just the way they do it was just really nice. So you can't even get mad at them. And then they're kind of like helping you and teaching you and helping you grow. But everyone's just so nice about it. And I was just really surprised with just everybody on the Twitter community, all the journalists from the different websites and stuff. Everybody's really, really nice, and it's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, and I talked about this with Nolan last week. I feel like there's sort of like, tiers in this industry, and you got the bigger outlets who are, all good, buddies, and then I feel like there's this other tier with, a group of everyone. Like I'd put you in that category and myself, and the guys over at MMA Today and Flow Combat and Fansided. There's all sort of like a a kind of a community in some ways, I'd say, like people helping each other out, whether it's retweeting an article. You mentioned Marcel. I love that guy. He's always retweeting my stuff over at MMA DNA, and he's doing some great interviews as well. So it's nice to get people like that and getting people to connect. And I mean, hey, that's why we're here today, is because I saw your work, I started following you, vice versa, and that's how we made this happen. So I think there is, as much as social media can sometimes be a bit of a cesspool as far as some of the people on there, the positive side of it is you are creating these relationships and this networking, and it's really sort of helping people get better, I'd say, because to be honest, like if I see you do an interview or someone do an interview, it's like, damn, I got to get on that, I got to do this or whatever. It's motivating, and I like seeing, I watch as much content as I can, just because for me, then I know what's out there, I know what people are doing, and I can figure out what works for me and what doesn't. And I think that's the beauty of this day and age, because back in the day, there was so limited media, and now it's just it's everywhere. There's a million different MMA websites, and it's cool to see all the different stuff that people are doing. So that's my little rant on that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, because for me, back home, I don't have anyone to really talk to about this. Obviously, my friends aren't into MMA at all. My brother is into it, but he lives abroad, so I don't get to talk to him as much. I don't have people like whether in the MMA industry or just big fans of the sport that I get to talk to or share ideas or share excitement or any of that. So I feel like Twitter is kind of that community that I get to do that with, since I don't have anybody back home. So that's why I do appreciate all the people that I've gotten to know through Twitter or social media.
And that's going to be my, and I was going to bring that to sort of my next question. How much of a challenge has it been, covering the sport with the crazy hours you work, and also, trying to have a social life? It's very easy to get sucked into the vortex that is, MMA social media, but you got to step away sometimes. And you mentioned playing basketball and things like that. How have you sort of adjusted to that?
It's a little difficult. I'm not gonna lie. Like my friends get pretty angry at me because I'll skip out on so many outings. And what happens is, like, if a fighter is free at that specific time that we're going out as a group, I do prioritize the fighter interview. That's just the way I've always been. I have to, because like it's easy to tell a fighter, like, I can't do this time, and then maybe if you try to reschedule to tomorrow, it never happens. So I'm not in a position to act like like you're gonna go by my schedule. So obviously I have to go by the fighter schedules, and because for me it's kind of like the second half of the days where anything really happens. So because there's like a 7-hour time difference between me and New York or Eastern time, and 10-hour Pacific. So really the news and just anything starts to happen, I'll probably say starting from like 6 p.m., 7 p.m. That's when anything starts happening in the MMA world, so to speak. So yeah, a lot of times I don't get to go out or socialize. I mean, today, like, it's a Thursday today, so basically the weekend back home is a Friday, Saturday.
Oh, interesting.
So
okay,
Thursday,
I didn't know that.
yeah, so Thursday would be the day I'd go out, maybe Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday are the fights. I'll play basketball in the morning, and then I want to get back home, and the fights are going to come, and I want to maybe take a nap, because sometimes it's so hard to stay up until 8 a.m., especially if the fights aren't super entertaining. So yeah, like some days it's like people know that I'm not going to be available, and that's a Saturday, and then Friday I try to see my family a bit, and then during the day it's just kind of like on social media or interviewing or writing or just doing. So yeah, it is hard, but it's manageable at the end of the day.
Yeah, it certainly is. I don't know how you do your, book your interviews or figure out time slots, but like I have to use like my Google Calendar. Otherwise I'll forget, or I'll like, I have to really, like, my wife has to have her schedule synced up with mine. So we know, like, hey, I have this amount of time to do this. And I know what you mean. Like I had, I won't mention the fighter, but I had a fighter that I had to reschedule 6 times because this particular fighter kept canceling on me, and I really wanted to get the interview. And sometimes you have to sort of adjust as best you can, but it can be difficult at times. I'm sure you can relate.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I was telling you, especially when I'd have interviews sometimes at 4 or 5 a.m. and the fighter would just forget. And it's kind of like, for me, it's like you have no idea how difficult it was for me to stay up. Like, I'm exhausted. Like I want a night to sleep for once. And obviously I can't tell them anything. So I'm just like, yeah, sure, no problem. And then sometimes the interview would never even happen. So that's why I'm like, I'm done doing the interview. And then sometimes it's like, they'll be like, I'm really sorry, I need to go to the chiropractor, or I have physiotherapy, or I'm finishing up at the gym. And that's okay, because that's life, right? So that's why I can't schedule an interview at 5 a.m. because if they tell me like I need to go to a chiropractor, can we do it in an hour and a half? It's like it'll become absolutely insane for me. And so which is why I kind of put what I do is I tell them like I'm good up until like 8 p.m. Eastern, which is 3 a.m. my time. And then if they're late for an hour, it's like 4 a.m. It's like fine, I can push to that. And yeah, I reckon that's the best way to go about it without like going crazy.
Okay, fair enough. What's been sort of the craziest hour you've ever done an interview? I remember I had to interview Angela Lee because she was in Hawaii, and it was the only time I could get her, and I had to do an interview at like I think 2 a.m. Eastern time, which was crazy. And I'm sure you've had a lot worse. But what sort of like have you done an interview at like 4 a.m. before? I'm sure you have.
Yeah. That's how it was in the beginning when I would put zero consideration into my time. Because the funny is like people would tell me it's like, you've got a day too. It's okay to tell them that it's really, really late for you. And in the beginning, I was just excited that these people were accepting the interviews and I didn't know them. And for them to say yes was big enough for me. So I didn't care if they told me 6 a.m., I'd say yes. And then eventually when there's better communication and they got to know me better and stuff, it became easy, especially if it's a recurring, like if it's like the 4th time I interview this person, then they understand like, so yeah, I've done interviews at 6 a.m., 5 a.m., 4 a.m., 7 a.m., like all sorts of timing. But now I try to push it to like 4 or 5 a.m. tops and try to go to sleep.
And one of the things you sort of touched on there is, which is something important if you're doing interviews, and I encounter this all the time, is sometimes a fighter will like I had an issue yesterday where I scheduled the time, did the reminder, did everything. I go to get in touch with the fighter and they're like, oh, I'm at the doctor's. And it's like, well, we talked about this. Like, if there was an appointment or something, give me a little heads up. That's why I send the reminder or whatever. So these things happen. But I mean, something you sort of touched on, I think is important to anyone watching is, you got to keep your cool. You got to be professional. Like, I will act like the nicest person in the world to that person. Oh, no big deal, whatever. Like, meanwhile, they don't know my wife's like super mad that I missed dinner because I had to reschedule something. Like, it's important to do that just because you never want to burn any bridges. And as much as MMA is a big sport, it's still small. People talk. And trust me, there's been many times when I've wanted to tell a manager or a fighter, like, what the heck, and tell them to, F off. But you have to be polite. And I think, that's something you've described here is it's very key to do that, to sort of keep those relationships.
Yeah, 100%. You can't show them that you're upset, or that's the thing I was saying, like you have to kind of cater to their day. Eventually when you get to know them better, it's like there could be consideration to your day as well. But in the beginning, when they don't know who I am, it's like, it's not important to start telling them that I'm halfway across the world and all that. Like they're not going to care.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the other thing too is that, you have to remember that, just because, if you go through an experience of a fighter where it's just such a pain in the ass to do the interview, like I won't even bother. Like, unless they're like a huge name, maybe I'll make that little extra effort to be like, okay, if they keep canceling, whatever. Because there's certain fighters that I interview where, I just hold my breath and hope that they show up on time. Usually, it can be some problems, but there's some fighters that I just won't even bother because it's such a hassle. And it's like, you know what? I'd rather give my time to someone that actually wants to do the interview and understands the importance of like, the promotion side of things and all that than someone who's going to make things like extremely difficult. Like, I'll tell you this, and I've talked about this before in the show, there are prelim fighters that you would think they were, Conor McGregor as far as representation. And it's like, come on, let's work together here. We don't need to make this too complicated. So I'm sure, I don't know if you've ever experienced that where it's just like loopholes and loopholes. Like, I can only do this time, or I have to do, like just ridiculous sort of things just to do a simple interview. I'm sure you've experienced that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think in my head, I'm like kind of giving you a platform to say what you want. Because the way I think about it, it's not that I'm a big name and you're getting to talk to me. It's more like sometimes people don't like to be so vocal on their own, so they don't want to go on a Twitter rant. But if I interview you and I ask you who you want to fight next, or give you that platform to speak, and then you retweet it and put it on all your social media platform, that's what's important, right? For your fans to see. So it's not a matter of you're talking to me. Like, it doesn't matter who I am. The idea is I'm giving you a platform and I'm asking you questions without maybe you coming off as arrogant, where you're on your own going to be like, all right, I want to fight this guy next. I'm giving you a platform where I'm putting you like, all right, you were put in a situation to say who you want to like fight next. So it's like, I'm giving you that platform. And yeah, sometimes I do get surprised with fighters that may not be those massive names, and they'll be really, really difficult to get for an interview. And I think about it, I'm like, I'm giving you a platform to kind of say what you want and share it with all your fans and people that follow my work. So I don't know. Yeah, I definitely get that.
And by the sounds of it, as far as how you get your interviews, I imagine a lot of it's through Instagram, because that's something I'm still like, my Instagram's more of just, me posting pictures of my cat and my food and, my son and things like that. It's not really like, I don't put a lot of my interviews on there just because I feel like Twitter and Facebook are sort of the juggernauts, but it sounds like you've kind of mastered that, especially with your huge following on your Instagram account.
Yeah, because that's my UFC. Definitely not my personal one. My personal one's just personal one, but like the UFC one, because sometimes I don't even know who follows me, to be honest. I'll get really surprised. Like I'll randomly post a story. So I'll put my article up as a story. I do that a lot, and I'll be like, swipe up. So I love that new thing where you swipe up. So I'll put that, and it's like seen by, and then I see this super popular fighter. I'm like, wait, do they follow me? Sometimes they don't. Sometimes I guess they're just like lurking. And sometimes they do. I'm like, that's so cool. That person follows me. So I have like direct contact. Like most of the times they won't agree to an interview, but if I ask them these little things like, I heard that whatever, like you're injured. Somebody said you're injured. Is that true? And then they'll be like, yeah, I hurt my knee. So I'm like, all right, that's a piece of information. This person's hurt their knee. And then if I talk to somebody else and they'd be like, I'd love to fight this guy. They're like, actually, I spoke to that guy and he told me he's got a knee injury. He's not going to be ready until the summer. So it's just these little things that allow me to be really informative about just different aspects. So it's just these little things. But sometimes these like superstars or whatever, like they won't agree to an interview. They'll answer everything else, but just not the interview part. But I still find it cool that they talk to me or like go back and forth with me, for sure.
Now, do you deal directly with the fighter usually, or do you go through like a manager in a lot of cases as well? Because I kind of have a mix. Because honestly, the first thing I'll do just as professionalism is I'll check their Twitter and Instagram and see, are they represented by such and such? If they are, then I'll go that route first. If not, then maybe I go the direct route. But yeah, that's sort of how I do it.
Both. If I'm not aware of who their management is, like if it's not clear, because some people will put that on their Twitter and Instagram. If I don't know who their management is, I'll go directly through them. If a lot of fighters put their contact information as their manager, so that's a lot easier because then you just go directly through the manager. And then sure. But Instagram, like I'll message, I'll DM a lot. Sometimes they direct me to their manager, and I prefer that because it's more organized. It's like more guaranteed that that person's actually gonna like follow, because then their manager gets to chase them, not me. Like their manager gets to
And the manager's paid to have time management, whereas some fighters, unfortunately, I mean, they just don't have good time management, or they don't remember, which is why I always send the reminder. So I agree with you there. Sometimes it's a lot easier sort of going through the manager. And one advantage I'll say with Instagram is a lot of them you can send direct messages to, whereas Twitter, ever since they put in that feature where you can't DM everyone, it's been a little bit more difficult. So yeah, for me, it's, I'll check Twitter first. Do they follow me? Yes or no? If they don't, whatever, like, well, yeah, first is the manager route, then the person directly. And then I have to go through all these other social media stages to figure out how I'm going to get a hold of them. But I'll be honest, I haven't had that much luck with Instagram. I don't know what it is, but I find that Facebook and Twitter have been sort of my best bets as far as, if I have to go directly to a fighter. So
I have tried Facebook, but I don't know why I'm just not getting that success that I want. I tried, but
there's that whole thing on Facebook. If you're not friends with someone, it goes to their like, fighters I've messaged that I just haven't heard back from, and then there's ones that get back to me right away. So it's kind of hit or miss that way. So there you go. Talking some trade secrets here as far as anyone wants. So that's good. Obviously you've done a lot over the last couple of years as far as the work you've done. What's sort of been the one moment for you so far in your career? And I know there's so much more you want to achieve, but that it was sort of like, wow, I'm really proud of this. Or has there been sort of like a big moment for you in your career where you're kind of like, wow, this is awesome. Like whether it was, might've been something where, you broke some news and it showed up on MMA Fighting. Would that be something like that?
Probably, I'd say breaking news is what allowed me to make even more journalistic connections, because those are important for me. Journalistic connections. I mean, the fans of the sport are great. I have a lot of those on Instagram that are diehard UFC and MMA fans, so those are great. But I feel like breaking the news has kind of given me a little bit more respect, I guess, in the MMA industry. So I'd probably say that, and then being credited by Ariel and MMA Fighting, MMA Junkie, and all those. So yeah, I'd probably say that. But for me personally, I get a bigger satisfaction out of doing the fighter interviews. I just really enjoy doing that, because not only am I a fan of the sport, I'm a fan of them as well. And it's just cool to get them to open up about their lives and and whatnot. So that for me personally, I enjoy a lot more. Breaking news is actually quite stressful because you have to kind of track and make sure that it's correct. And then if somebody denies it, you have to stick to your guns, and then the truth comes out, and then all that. It's kind of like a pain, especially that it ruins my sleep 100%, because then instead of sleeping, I'm just like anxious and worried about following up on stuff. So
yeah. Again, it's the toughest job in the industry. I mean, I don't envy anyone who has to, if their sole purpose is breaking news. See, it's good with you because you do kind of a mix, but I mean, there's people that all they do is breaking news, and it's like, man, I do not wish that at all, because you know, you got to worry about managers and promotions and all that. So it's but again, you know, you get the credit, then you know you're that much cooler. We've got about 15 minutes left here on the show. We did actually start a little bit late, so maybe we'll extend it 16 minutes perhaps. But we do have a question here in the chat, and it's from Stone Osborne here, who's you know, been watching the show a lot. He asks, have you ever had an interview start bad and get worse? How do you rebound once a negative precedent has been set? Have you ever had a difficult interview where the follow-up was much better? Okay, so those are two separate questions, but I'll start with the first. Yes, I had one where some people know the story, maybe they don't, and you definitely don't know the story, so you'll get a kick out of it. So I'm interviewing a regional fighter here in Canada, and I tried to interview him before because I had interviewed this other fighter who was talking a lot of crap about him, saying, you know, he's ducking fights and all this stuff. So I had the one fighter on, fighter was talking a lot of crap. I tried to reach out to the other fighter, he never got back to me, and then I ended up interviewing that fighter, you know, like we're saying, like a couple months later. So we do the interview literally beforehand, because I do video interviews. You know, I get a little bit of back and forth before we start the interview, you know, making sure everything's set up and, you know, how's it going, all this stuff. So everything's fine. So in my head, I'm thinking before we're going to do this interview, everything's cool. I was wrong. I go and start the interview. First question I ask is, you know, blah, blah, blah. Here I have such and such. He's fighting such and such for this promotion on whatever date. And how are you today? I'm good. By the way, I saw your interview where you were saying that I was ducking these fights and blah, 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 and blah, blah, all this stuff. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on a second here. First off, I didn't say that. So like this happens out of the blue and there's nothing I can do. And yes, I can edit my interviews, but I felt it was important for people to see this interview, you know, to see sort of what happens. And so this guy basically got mad because I had someone on that was talking badly about him. And he just, because I guess he couldn't get to that fighter, he wanted to blame me and said that I was saying this, which I wasn't. I was just asking my questions. Fighter was saying whatever. I mean, I got to let the fighter speak. So this all happens. And you know, I'm kind of like, crap, what am I going to do here? So I immediately step in and I say, look, like, you know, just so we're clear here, I didn't say any of that. This, you know, this other person did. And he's like, oh, you know, it was so disrespectful. Why didn't you call him out on it and whatever? And it's like, well, I don't know. Like, if he's saying this, I have to take him for whatever he's saying, whatever. So anyways, long story short, we ended up doing the interview. It was not very good. You know, I felt like I did turn it around just with the fact that I was able to sort of deflect and tell this guy the truth, which was, hey, you know, I didn't say any of this. This was someone else who did this. And that's that. And, you know, we did the interview or whatever. And it's funny because when I posted the interview, I had so many people message me saying, what a jerk that guy was. You know, how could he do this? You know, he should appreciate the opportunity, blah, 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 on this. So from that sense, it was actually good. And I don't know if I still have that interview on my channel. I may have deleted it. I hope. I can't remember. I have to look. I literally have almost like 2,000 videos on my channel, so I'd have to go search through it. But it was a couple years back. But that was an example of where I had to do that. Now, do you have a story like that? Because I imagine you know, you seem you know, seem like no one would really give you a hard time.
Not while I'm with them on the phone. I've gotten a couple of people that didn't like the way I phrased things. So after I published the article, so now I'm focusing a lot on putting them out on audio. But before, when I transcribe everything, they didn't like the way I went about certain things, and it would be more like it's a factual thing that I'm saying, but they didn't like the way I phrased things. So I'd get a message from them, and they'd be like that's not cool that you said this, and I'm just like, all right, like I have no problem with it. Like if you want me to, I'm like, I didn't mean it like that. I meant it like whatever, like that, and I'd change it for them because I'm like, I don't want to upset them at the end of the day. If they're making me change something completely, like if they gave me a great piece of information, then that's different. But like, they just the phrasing they didn't like, and it's more like factual, something to do about a loss that they had, like a fight that they lost or a fight that they got knocked out in. And it's like, because when you're doing these pieces, not everybody's going to know who that person is or who their opponent is. So I have to give a backstory and be like, in their last fight that happened, but then they rebounded or whatever. And they don't like that. And it's like, all right, I'll change it for you. But I know a lot of journalists kind of carry that chip on their shoulder where they don't like to be told what to do. And they get extra stubborn about it. Like, you're not going to tell me how to write and speak and whatnot. I don't have that. I do kind of like to make the fighter or the person I'm talking to comfortable, because at the end of the day, like you said before, I don't want to burn bridges or upset anybody. And obviously my intention was, like, it's not like I said he got knocked the hell out. Like, I didn't say it like that, but like I put it in a way that they just didn't like it. So I changed it. And I'm like, you know what?
You brought up something very interesting, which we haven't talked about on the show before, but that has happened to me before where, I did an interview and someone didn't like what was said. And granted, I do a lot of, video stuff. So, I mean, really, they can't say anything unless they specifically said after the interview, hey, can you cut that part out or whatever? Then, I'm going to leave it in because, I mean, you said it. It's not like I, created what else. So I've had two instances where this has been interesting. I had one where, a fighter did an interview and then, and I didn't even provoke them. They just, after they're like, yeah, I want to fight this guy next. So did the interview, put the interview up, put in the title of the interview, blah, 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 talks about this and wants to fight such and such next. And they got all mad because they're like, oh, I don't want the focus to be on the other fighter. And I'm like, well, you said this, like, it's not on me, like, it's like, if you hadn't have said it, or if you say, if someone says directly after the interview, like, hey, I didn't mean to say that, can you take that part out? Fair enough. But if you're waiting till it's published and, you know what you said, like, come on. Like, so yeah. I see both sides of it, because I think if you're doing your job, if you're asking legitimate questions and they give you something that's not even remotely controversial, you should keep it in. If someone tells you to take it out, I think generally you should keep it in. Now, I had an instance where a fighter was talking about their visa status, and they didn't want it to be public information. And, I put the video out and they said it and they realized it after. That's different. I don't want to get anyone in trouble. Yeah, so there's something different there. So I had no issues doing that. But in general, I think it's a good, sort of point to make sure that, you keep stuff in. Now, again, if that fighter I just mentioned where they said, hey, I don't want to talk about this other fighter I was up for a bit. I was polite about it. I did end up doing it just because it's like, whatever. But, part of me kind of wishes I didn't. But here's the other thing. It's like, now I know that, like, I'm not going to make a big effort to interview this person.
Yeah,
going forward, because I mean, you fight, for God's sakes. It's like, you're really this concerned about someone else finding out or whatever. Like, I'll tell you one thing I don't like is when an interview's posted and someone's calling out another fighter, you tag that other fighter on social media. I don't like that. I don't subscribe to that. And I think even
I was about to tell you that.
Yeah. So that's something I can understand. But I think if you say something and it's within reason of a regular interview, I just don't see the reason to kind of go and change it. And again, you're going to be controlled by people if you start doing that. So I agree with you. There's definitely a fine line, but you have to find that fine line and figure out what you think is ethical and what isn't. And if, I mean, there's certain journalists, we know who they are, certain sites that really are digging for that, that clickbait. But it's like story and talk about the fight and talk about other cool stuff. And I'm not here to make any enemies, but it's got to be within reason. I think you agree on that.
Yeah, 100%. Because another problem that I have is predictions. So when I do these like live videos on Instagram, because like I said, I don't know who's watching them. And it's the craziest thing, because I've got a lot of fighter wives, siblings, managers, strength and conditioning, nutritionists that are watching this. And obviously I don't know, because like the name is just a regular name. And I get a lot of people asking me, like, who do you think is going to win? And I'm like, I don't know who's watching this. Maybe nobody, maybe a couple of people, but like, I don't want to say like, give like my full analysis, because I don't want to burn bridges. So one thing that I have refrained from like recently is predictions. I like to give a breakdown how this person can win and that person can win, but I don't like giving a prediction, because I remember one time this specific person was asking me so many questions. He's like so random, like, what do you think of blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, oh, he's good. He's on a nice run, blah, blah. Thank God I said everything positive. And then he goes, yeah, because I'm a strength and conditioning coach. And I'm just like, this is almost like a trap, like, imagine if I said something like, I don't know, like something negative or something not nice. And I'm just like, it's just almost like a trap, because you don't know who's watching. You don't want to say something like, I don't like to be one of these journalists or whatever that really says negative things about this person. Like, this person should shut up. Like, he doesn't deserve a title shot. And I've seen a lot of people do that, like recently with the Cody TJ thing. And I'm just like, what? Like, why are you talking crap about Cody, or why are you talking crap about TJ? Like, at the end of the day, like, these are top ranked bantamweights. You can understand both their sides. Like, obviously Cody's not going to say no to a title shot. Like, is he going to tell the UFC, no, let me build my way back up, don't give me a title shot? And you can understand TJ's point, like, I want to train, like, I'm fighting a top ranked guy. I just had a son, like, I want a proper training camp or whatever. And you get these journalists that are being, accept the fight, like, you don't deserve the fight. Like, I don't know. And I find that a little strange. I'm like, to each their own, to be honest, but like I wouldn't do that. Like I'm not I don't agree with that. I'll, even if deep down inside I really feel something, I'll just keep it to myself, to be honest. Or I could say there are nicer ways to go about it.
Well, we're all fans of the sport, but you have to separate that if you're working in the industry, because you don't want to come across as biased. And I do see some journalists that will tag fighters and will say, you know, such and such quit. Like you can't, you can't do stuff like that, especially if you want to if you're a fan and you're identifying yourself as a fan, you can say whatever you want. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. You can say the most vile. I mean, you're going to lose a lot of integrity if you go out there and start tagging fighters and taking sides. And you should always be objective. I mean, there's fighters, and I'm sure you have this too, where, you know, there's fighters I'm friends with, you know, that you know, I talk to outside the, you know, the interview and things like that. But I try not to show that on camera, because you don't want to be biased or influenced, and you don't want people to think you're favoring a certain person. And I'm with you on the picks thing too. Like one of the things I get roasted for, and I knew this, you know, going in, is I do the prospect rankings for Flow Combat, and I get managers and everyone, you know, this and that, saying, how can you put this person at this thing? And what I tell them simply is, look, like, and I know I'm going to get backlash because everyone wants to be number one on the rankings, of course. I say, email me and we'll do it in private and we'll talk about it. I'm not going to argue in public, because it's just not necessary. And, you know, with social media, anyone can take what you say and twist it however they want to twist it. And it's just better to leave that all behind closed doors. So yeah, it's sort of the same thing that we all kind of face here. We've got about 4 minutes left, about 4 or 5 minutes left. I wanted to ask you, you know, I'm sure you have people reaching out to you, especially as a female covering the sport. What's one of the questions you sort of get asked the most, just from people that might be interested in your work?
I get a lot of people asking me like how to start in this, and the funny thing is I don't really have a concrete answer of what the best way is to start. I always tell them you have to be passionate, you have to put the hours in. I'm like, you have to get that sorted first. If you're willing to do that, then you can start off. I'm like, start off in any way, honestly. I'm like, build your social media, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever way you want to go. Build connections. Talk to fellow journalists and analysts and reporters, and just kind of build your way from there. Because if I look back at the way I started, I can't point at one thing and say that was it. You know, I started with Instagram, and I just used that to kind of get a couple of interviews, and then I built my Twitter, and I understood that building my Twitter was a lot more important than Instagram, because Instagram, I'm behind a UFC updates page. People don't know who I am. Before, there wasn't the whole video feature and swipe up and all that stuff. It was just purely pictures. Videos, there's copyright issues with videos, so I don't post videos. It's purely just images that I always credit and source. So yeah, I used Instagram to build my Twitter, and once I built my Twitter, that's helped me build my Instagram a lot more. So they kind of go hand in hand. But I get a lot of people asking me how to be a fighter, and I'm like, I'm afraid I can't help you with that. They ask me like, do you know anybody that can get me in the UFC? And I'm just like,
I get that a lot. I had someone the other day ask me, hey, do you know how I can get this fighter on this card? And I'm like, no, like, dude, read, like, it was on Facebook too. And I said, like, go to the about section, clear as day, MMA journalist, nothing to do with matchmaking, nothing to do with promoting. Like, come on, you gotta read that stuff. So I mean, even I get this too. One thing we kind of talked about a little bit on here, and I wanted to see if there's anything else that you kind of noticed. But what are some mistakes you see people making, as far as you know, things that you've noticed that you feel like, you probably shouldn't be doing that?
In terms of fellow journalists and stuff?
Yeah, just whether it's, you know, stuff on social media, or maybe the ways people are posting their content. Like, is there anything that you see as mistakes that you see people making that you're like, you know, I like that you wouldn't do?
Well, the thing we talked about before, the whole bias thing, just kind of taking sides and defending like one fighter a lot, because I get carried away sometimes by doing that, and I notice that I'm doing that and I stop, but never to the extent where I'm trashing somebody else. It's more like I'll say like, I understand why that fighter is doing that. Then I'm like, why am I even doing that? Like, this isn't even a discussion panel or anything like that. But yeah, avoid being biased, taking sides. Of course, you're going to have favorites. Of course, you're going to have people that you talk to that have helped your career as a journalist. There's certain fighters that have really helped you because they're good interviews and they spread it out and whatever. But yeah, definitely don't pick sides or show any bias. Don't. Some people may ask others to kind of retweet their work and stuff like that. I've noticed that.
I talked about this on here. I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah. Like asking people to spread your work and stuff like that. Because another thing is like people asking you like, I don't know about this. Like, I'm not going to say that this is wrong or anything, but people asking you like, how do you interview? Like, how do you get contact with this person and that person and that person? And sometimes, if it's the manager, then that's fine. But if it's my own personal way, how do I know that that fighter is going to appreciate me?
Giving out the contact info. Exactly. Yeah. That's a big thing too. Yeah. I get that every now and then. It's like, look, I'll give them the, the manager, I'll say, hey, hit them up on Facebook. Like,
yeah,
you're putting yourself at risk if the person does a bad interview. And I get random people doing this. It's like, are you nuts? I don't even know you.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's like the manager's one thing because he'll handle that. But like for me personally, I have a lot of fighters' numbers on my contact list, a lot. And I don't like to text them because I don't know, like I think maybe texting is a little personal. I still insist on social media. And the problem with social media is not everybody checks it all the time. And they go, why didn't you text me? I was like, well, whatever, like it's okay. But I prefer not to text. Like me personally, nothing to do with, I don't know, I may get backlash for saying this, but like maybe as a female, there's a line I have to draw that's different than being a male journalist, where maybe if I was a male journalist, I'd be completely okay with texting, fighting and stuff. But I do try to keep that fine line of professionalism as a female journalist, where I'm not going to pick up the phone and just directly call or start texting fighters and stuff. I'm like, there's social media for that if I want to have a discussion. I do have tons of fighters' numbers, but I don't like to, unless I have to, unless it's like interview time, or they specifically tell me, text me, then that's different. But I don't like to text fighters. And I know text is so much easier and I will get my answer right away and I don't have to stay up those extra hours, but I still go for the social media route, always.
That's interesting. I've never heard that before. I actually think that texting isn't, well, personally, and again, I'm a male in this industry, so maybe I look at it a little bit differently, but I think texting's actually better because it's usually faster, because a lot of times
100%.
social media, yeah, like kind of you were saying, it's not bad. But one thing I do agree with you on, and this is something we talked about last week, I talked with Nolan about, is I don't add people to Facebook at all, because again, that's kind of personal, unless it's someone I know really well, like whatever, but I generally don't go to my way to add fighters, because, and even though if I added the fighter and I sent them a message, boom, it's completely set. But some people, I just know how they are. Facebook's a little bit more personal. They have photos of their kids and stuff. Like, I can understand them not wanting me to see that part of their life. So it's interesting you say that. So I kind of treat what you said about texting, about adding people to Facebook, but I think texting's, I don't think it's a huge deal. But again, I have
But that's the thing. Like, I don't want to get backlash over this, because that's just, it's something that I create in my head. Like, I'm sure if I text a fighter, they're not even going to care. But that's just something I create, and that's a boundary, because like I physically covered a couple events at Brave Combat Federation, and like MMA is such a male dominated sport. So it's like 85% of the time or 90% of the time, it's me as this one girl roaming around, and there's like God knows how many guys, like the fighters, their coach, and I'm just sitting there, and like I like to keep my distance, and like I'm not, like, I don't know these people, they don't know me. We may have interacted, but they don't know me personally. Yeah. Like in that way, and I like to keep things naturally. If they're natural, that allows me to be natural. But then I don't know how to read, like, people face to face could be different than when you're texting, right? So
they can take it the wrong way. I think we were getting at here, if I can, sorry to interrupt, but guys that are trying to cross that professional line and maybe trying to hit on you or whatever, like, as a woman, that's unfortunately always going to be a factor with males, because we're idiots, and it's just the way we're programmed, I guess. So if you're a fighter, though, you should respect that line, male, female, whoever, it should be like that. But I now understand what you mean a bit more about that now, because that makes sense.
And again, I'm saying that's just because I don't want, like, other female journalists being like, there's nothing wrong with that. I am not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying
it's your personal thing.
That way.
Yeah,
I prefer it that way, just to keep a professional line. So I'm just personally not a fan of like getting that phone and texting them and stuff like that. I'm like, they're not, like, I don't know. But that's just me personally. Like, maybe in the future, if I ever, So it's just a thing for me. But of course, texting is a lot easier because everybody's got their phone next to them, as opposed to Twitter or Instagram even.
Fair enough. Last question, and again, we're over a little bit, but I wanted to know this before I let you go. What is the sort of the perfect job for you? What would be sort of the career highlight, as far as whether it's in this industry or it's maybe working in the NBA? Like, what's the dream job for you right now, or are you living the dream job right now?
Well, I am in the process, I'd say, of living the dream job. I would want to, I guess, eventually work for a major, like maybe like an actual, like, get paid for what I do, have a job where I get to fly out to events and cover them and stuff like that. Preferably not with the struggle of the whole time difference and all that kind of thing. Have just things a lot more professional. I mean, that's been one of my goals for this year. Just like pin down everything, like in terms of my interviews and everything that I do, just step everything up just a notch in terms of professionalism. Because I feel like I've built the contacts and then the connections and all that, but I just feel like it's time to take things to the next level in terms of professionalism, because I guess, I mean, I don't know. I mean, some fighters pay attention to that. Some of them will ask me a lot of questions like, who are you? Where do you write? What do you do? And kind of stuff. And then I'll get no answer after that. So that means they didn't like what I said. So I feel like I'm just stepping up things to the next level. Hopefully write for some major MMA site would probably be my next goal.
Excellent. Well, Farah, I want to thank you so much for coming here on the program. I can't believe how quickly this hour just flew by talking shop here. And I can't wait to see what's next for you. Again, I'm so happy to get you on here now before you become a big deal, because I really feel like you and Nolan and a few of the other journalists are really going to make it big. So I was happy to have you on here. Just remind people where they can get a hold of you on social media, and anything you got coming up this week for the Sports Journal or any of the interviews you got. By all means, the floor is yours.
Yeah, on Twitter, you can find me on Farah_Hannoun. So it's FARAH_HANNOUN on Twitter. On SoundCloud, Farah-Hannoun, you can find a lot of my interviews there. Sports Journal, you can just search for me by my name, or you'll find on my Twitter as well. I post all my interviews there. On Facebook, I've got my UFC page at UFC News Alerts on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to stay up to date with everything, and you don't like to read and you don't like Twitter, that's a outlet for you, I guess.
Excellent. And for those who are checking out my stuff, as always, it's at Lynch on Sports. And I got a bunch of stuff for this Saturday's card here, UFC 221. I just interviewed both headliners yesterday over on Fanside. Luke Rockhold, Yoel Romero. And then here on Fightful, I've got an interview with Curtis Blades. I did a couple weeks back. So he sort of talks about his training camp and all that. Of course, you got the Pros Picks videos and always lots of great content up on Fightful.com. And we will be back here next Thursday, business as usual, for the MMA Industry podcast. And once again, I want to thank Farah for coming on the show, and we'll see you next Thursday. Thanks for watching.